So the parasympathetic nervous system is also called the craniosacral division because it involves brainstem cranial nerves as well as sacral spinal nerves that carry parasympathetic information. We find that with the parasympathetic nervous system, we have long preganglionic fibers that extend from the central nervous system towards the target organ, and they synapse with postganglionic neurons in terminal ganglia that are either close to or within the target organ itself. And so because the ganglia is so close to the target organ, we find that they have short postganglionic fibers that are unmyelinated, but those actually synapse with the effector. Now, just as a summary of the parasympathetic nervous system, remember it involves some cranial nerves like 3, 7, 9, and 10, as well as some sacral spinal nerves that come from S2 to S4. Now, the first cranial nerve we'll talk about is oculomotor nerve. Remember, oculomotor nerve had motor output to some of the extrinsic eye muscles, like 4 out of the 6 extrinsic eye muscles were innervated by oculomotor or cranial nerve number 3. Now, the parasympathetic function of oculomotor nerve is actually to control the smooth muscle of your eye, including the pupils, and the smooth muscle that controls the shape of the lens for focusing. So we find then that the ganglia that before it goes to the eyeball, the postganglionic cell bodies are located in what we call the ciliary ganglia, which are within the eye orbitals, just near the eyeball, and then those postganglionic fibers actually go out to the smooth muscle itself. Now, facial nerve, or cranial nerve number 7, we talked about how its other function was for controlling a lot of somatic motor function to facial muscle expression, as well as taste, but it also has a parasympathetic function as well, and parasympathetically it stimulates large glands in the head. So we find that the fibers activate nasal and lacrimal glands. They actually have their synapses in the pterygopalatine ganglia, and fibers that activate the submandibular and sublingual glands have their synapses in the submandibular ganglia. So there's 2 different ganglia that are associated with the facial nerves here. Glossopharyngeal nerves also carry parasympathetic nervous system information, or cranial nerve number 9 rather, and this actually stimulates the parotid salivary glands, and these fibers are actually in the otic ganglia. Now the vagus nerve is the biggest, and this accounts for 90% of all preganglionic parasympathetic fibers in the body. Now remember, vagus is the wanderer, cranial nerve number 10. It goes down your neck, and it serves all thoracic and abdominal viscera. Now, preganglionic fibers arise from the medulla and synapse and terminal ganglia, intramural, within the walls of target organs. And we have plexuses that are associated with their corresponding organ. So we have a cardiac plexus that's associated with the vagus nerve. This actually slows down your heart rate. Again, it's parasympathetic function. We have a pulmonary plexus that goes to your lungs and bronchi, and this actually causes bronchoconstriction, which can decrease airflow. And we have the esophageal plexus, which has anterior and posterior vagal trunks that then go to the stomach, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, small intestine, and the proximal 2/3 of your large intestine. And again, this is going to control the digestive functions that your parasympathetic nervous system is used for. Now, the sacral division of your parasympathetic nervous system originates from neurons in the S2 to S4 spinal nerves. And these serve the pelvic organs because the vagus nerve doesn't go that far. So the vagus nerve stops at the abdominal cavity, but pelvic organs, think urinary bladder and reproductive organs, as well as the rectum, are innervated by the sacral spinal nerves that carry some parasympathetic information. These axons travel in the ventral root of the spinal cord, and they branch off to form the pelvic splanchnic nerves. Now, they synapse with ganglia in the pelvic floor. We call these a hypogastric or pelvic plexus. And then these postganglionic neurons actually go and innervate things like the distal part of your large intestine, so basically like the sigmoid colon and rectum, as well as the urinary bladder, the ureters, and reproductive organs you find in the pelvic cavity. So just to summarize, the parasympathetic nervous system, remember it's craniosacral, and so there's actually 4 cranial nerves that give rise to parasympathetic information. So we have our oculomotor, which is 3, facial, which is 7, glossopharyngeal, which is 8, or 9 rather, and then vagus, which is 10. So the oculomotor nerve actually communicates with the ciliary ganglia, which goes to the smooth muscle of your eye. So it's going to control like your pupillary diameter, as well as lens. And cranial nerve number 7 goes to both the pterygopalatine and the submandibular ganglia. Pterygopalatine ganglia goes to the nasal mucosa as well as your lacrimal gland. And it's interesting here that if your nasal mucosa and lacrimal gland are stimulated simultaneously, this is one of the reasons why when you're crying, you also get a lot of nasal mucus that's generated, because these are both connected by the same nerve, or branches of the nerve rather. And then the submandibular ganglia associated with facial nerve goes to the submandibular and sublingual salivary glands. Now, cranial nerve number 9, which is glossopharyngeal, goes to the otic ganglia, and that communicates with the parotid salivary gland. And then cranial nerve number 10 carries 90% of preganglionic parasympathetic nerve fibers, and it goes to your heart, your lungs, as well as most of your abdominal viscera. And so on your heart, it's going to slow your heart rate down. On your lungs, it's going to actually bronchoconstrict. And then on your digestive viscera, it's going to increase digestive activities. Now, the reason why the vagus nerve doesn't go to your pelvic organs is that it doesn't go that far, actually. Instead, we have our sacral spinal nerves that actually branch off, and they go through the ventral root through sacral spinal nerves 2 through 4. They go and basically communicate with this inferior hypogastric plexus, which then innervates things like reproductive organs, your urinary bladder, as well as the distal part of your large intestine, like your rectum and sigmoid colon.